Welcome to Sales Secrets from the Top 1%, where the world's best sales experts share their secrets to sales success. My name is Bornancin, a serial salesperson and entrepreneur, and I'm sitting down with the world's best sales experts to share their top secrets to sales success. Hello and welcome to this episode of Sales Secrets from the Top 1%, where the world's best sales experts share their secrets to sales success. And I'm thrilled, humbled, honored, and grateful to have with me today my good friend, Richard Harris. Richard, if you don't know who he is, he's the CEO of Harris Consulting Group, head of sales training at Sales Hacker, and obviously, I'm sure you've heard of him as a top 25 inside sales leader, trainer, sales hacker, public speaker, sales advisor. He's on every sales chart that you see everywhere. And Richard also previously consulted for companies in sales like Visa, Zoom, Intercom, Salesloft, Terminus, Gainsight, Pandadoc. And he previously sold for companies like Mashery, which was a big API management company, PC Guardian, the Learning Group. Wow, Richard, game changer in the sales industry. We are happy to have you with us today from San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining.
I don't know if there's anything else I need to say after that introduction, but I am equally humbled. As much as I like the hype and I love the hype and I appreciate the hype, let's get down to brass tacks too, though, because I that makes me feel awkward. So, but thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Well, the audience is thrilled to learn more about your sales secrets, your sales strategy that you recommend, your top secret to sales success. But before we get into that, people want to know, who is Richard? Who are you? What's your background? Where did you come from? How'd you get started in sales? Where did you work? What are the sales successes and failures that you've had throughout your career? Take us back to the beginning, my man.
Yeah. So, and we'll talk more about the failures than the successes, because I think the failure is what drives success.
Yeah.
And believe me, I've had plenty. And I think that anybody who is successful will probably have some similar stories.
I agree.
But I grew up in Macon, Georgia. Mom and dad, I was a latchkey kid. I'm a Gen Xer. I was walking home from school by myself every day at the age of 10, because that's just what you did. We didn't have cell phones. I just knew to call my mom when I got home, let her know I got there. And that, that's sort of where I got it. But my dad sold insurance, which I would never want to sell. And my mom was one of the very first, one of the first female salespeople is sort of in the business world in our community, I think. She sold, believe it or not, back in the day, Cox Cable came along, ESPN came along.
Okay.
This is when ESPN was testing whether or not a replay of a University of Alabama game would go over well on a Tuesday night after the game was on Saturday. This is before every college game was televised. And I know that's going to blow people's minds away, but you couldn't watch college games. You got like maybe two a week on a Saturday, right? And so people who grew up in that time will know what I'm talking about. But so she sold advertising for cable television, right? That was her first thing.
And your dad, what type of insurance did he sell?
It just like life insurance and health insurance. He was an independent broker, so
all the above.
He sold to businesses. Yeah, he would have sold to you or me or any of those other folks. So
awesome.
So I was certainly surrounded by this sort of sales mentality, business mentality from my folks that I think certainly cultivated what I wanted to become. I knew I wanted to be in business. I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. Eventually, my mom became a stockbroker. She's still a financial planner to this day. And I remember, I think I was probably 15. Which would have made it probably 83 or 84, maybe 84, 85. And, the first stock I bought back in the day was MTV, right? And, that was a genius stock to buy back in the 80s. And then that eventually got bought by Viacom or somebody. And then, so I had to sell that one. And then I moved over to Disney, and then I moved over to Nike. And, and I was playing with, I was playing with like confirmation money. It's not like I had some big bankroll, right? I had a few $100 and some money in my pocket. And we were like, well, how do we start to invest this? And so
that
got
was
me
back then too, before you couldn't go online and just buy stock.
Now
Robinhood, you could do it on your phone, for free. And I trade all the time.
I still haven't figured out Robinhood, right? I mean, look, let's face it. My mom's still my broker. I always love it when these brokers connect with me on LinkedIn. They're like, well, who are you using? And I'm like, look, unless, if you're more trustworthy than my mom, go for it. But let me cut you off, right?
Yeah, you're not going to win that business.
No, you're not going to win that battle.
Was it hard for her to jump from like, do you remember her jumping from selling ad network to stocks? Like that's a huge jump, right?
Yeah, I do. And you know, it's another story, but you know, she's also shared the stories of what it was like to be a woman in the 80s, you know, with the way that you know, it was just perceived. And even before she, you know, I forgot, even before she sold TV ads, she actually sold ads on the radio. She was even a talk show host back in the 70s when I was a kid on the radio. And the station decided to sort of end the talk show, and they asked her if she'd sell ads, and that's when she started doing sales. So it was, you know, it was a bit crazy. So
whatever it takes.
Yeah, whatever it takes. And you know, she tells, you know, this is going to shock people, but I'll say it, is, you know, she tells this great story about going in for the job interview at the radio station, and this was the time, and they just said, you know, what kind of birth control are you on? Are you planning to have more kids? Like,
oh shit.
Exactly. Like you can't even approach that today. And that was sort of normal, right? So, so I know that my mom's been through, one, she's just been a big inspiration. And also, you know, she went through her own trials and tribulations, you know, as a married mom who was going back to work in the 70s, which was unusual. And then certainly as a single mom, when my parents split up, you know, having to you know, do her share to support the family. And then, you know, look, I got very lucky. My parents split in about as amicable way as possible. There was no bad blood. There was no custody issues. There was none of that, you know, sort of stuff. But you know, it still it affects anybody, right? It affects the kids. It affects the wife. It affects the husband. And so it was, you know, it was an interesting learning experience, I think, that probably led to my level of perseverance and understanding of what I wanted to accomplish, and certainly set the tone for my, you know, my definition of hard work. So
yeah, and so you were in school. Your mom was selling for the ad networks, and then got into the stock brokerage. You started trading. Your dad was doing the insurance stuff, which is awesome. It's pretty cool to hear that, like, both your parents were in sales essentially, or in entrepreneurship.
Totally. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So did you know, like, going into school, did you know that you, like, hey, my parents did sales, I want to do sales?
No, I knew I wanted to go to business. So, you know, fast forward, you know, and then, I mean, fast forward to college, you know, I went to the University of Arizona. I just got a general business.
You're like, I need to get out of Georgia.
Oh, fuck yeah, dude. Oh,
you were like sick
never
of it.
look back.
Wow.
Like the joke was that some gypsies, you know, I was born in California and some gypsies kidnapped me and took me to Georgia. That was my joke.
Yeah.
My parents didn't particularly care for it. But I wanted to get out of Georgia. I wanted to go see the world. I was very fortunate that, you know, I had a grandparent who left money specifically for my education, and
that's amazing.
And probably could have gone to any school I wanted to go that I could get into. Right. I certainly had no desire to go to Ivy League. Like that was never my desire at all. And I sort of had narrowed it down to Arizona and Florida, and I did not get into Florida. Florida was really my first choice. So my senior year in high school, I was going to Israel from like February to April for a high school program for a couple of months. And I got rejected by Florida, and I was like, oh my God, now what am I going to do? And so I picked up the phone and just called Arizona to say, hey, can you let me know? And so they pulled me up on the computer at that point and said, yep, your letter's on the way. So 4 days before I went to Israel in my senior year, between February and April, I found out I was going to Arizona. So that took all the senior pressure off, right? Like,
awesome.
Could you imagine leaving the country, you know, for those 2 months, not knowing where you're going to go to school in the next 6 months? Like,
that freaked me out.
As much as I'm a Georgia Bulldog fan, I just wanted to go somewhere different. I needed to get out. And so that was really, really important to me. So
why did you initially want to go to Florida? Just curious.
I'd gone to a summer camp. You know, I was an East Coast kid, so we did summer camp every year. And I went to the summer camp with all these other folks who are from Florida, but they all ended up at University of Florida. And I went to this camp for like 10 or 11 years. So I would have walked in with an entire network of friends already.
I love Florida.
So
When I graduated from college, I went to New York, and I really wish I went to Florida instead.
yeah, so I was sort of geared to go to University of Florida, but look, life didn't turn out that way. I went to Arizona. I have some of my
Arizona's
best friends
beautiful
ever.
too, right?
All the guys and I are getting together this summer to hang out up in Tahoe. So I got no complaints about Arizona. So
Awesome. So you go to school in Arizona, and you study business,
yep.
and then you graduate. Like, walk us through like the
Yeah, so
how
the
you
first
got.
genesis, right? So in high school, I had this job at the Gap, right? And I love telling this story. And this is before the Gap is what it is today. This is when Gap only sold Levi's jeans. They didn't even have their own brand. I remember when their
Oh
first
wow,
brand
they
came out.
were a reseller. That's
Yeah,
so
totally.
awesome.
Right. If you really know the history of the Gap, it was started here in San Francisco, and it actually was a record store and jeans store. The owner thought that back in the late '60s that they'd want to buy a pair of jeans and an album together, and he
What?
sort of figured out over time that people were not buying the music; they were coming for the jeans. And so that's sort of the genesis of that. But my very first sales process that I ever learned was called Gap Act, and I talk about this in my training. It's greet, approach, product knowledge, add on, close, and thank you. Right. And when you see that greeter at the front of the store at the Gap and they say, "Hey, how you doing?" That's part of the sales process, right? When they throw these other things at you that says, "Oh, it would look really good with those jeans, this shirt," right? Like, it's all part of the process. So that was my first sales process. So that was my job in high school.
That's awesome.
And sort of after I went into college and didn't, again, I fortunately didn't have to work. And sort of my last semester in college, I was like, well, I should probably go get a job. And I've always wanted to work for the Gap. I thought it would be cool to wear jeans and t-shirts after school, right? I mean, after I got out of college, like, I didn't want to wear a suit and tie. I've been pretty averse to this outfit for a long time. And so I went and got a job part-time my last semester, and I kind of thought I had it made in the shade, and I sucked. It was terrible. And so literally, and they knew when I interviewed, they said, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I want to move into management here. Like, I'm graduating in 6 months, and I'd really, want to get started, and I want to come work here." And then, they were like, "That's great." And then I just sort of thought it was going to happen, and I was terrible at it. So I got fired.
And what was that job? The place
Just sales, just basic sales at a retail store. Like,
Oh,
not hard.
like literally at a retail store, like at a mall, or like at the mall?
At the mall. Right. There was no freestanding Gap store at that point. Right?
You're like, I want to go into. Oh, that's brutal. And
right.
and this. Okay, so you get fired. Do you know?
So I get fired.
Figure out why?
Figured out why, and I begged and pleaded with my boss. I was like, "Please, please, please, don't do this. This is my dream. This is what I want to do." And I was crushed. Yeah. And so she said, "Well, you know what? I'll keep you on through the holidays, but only on an on-call basis. But you got to show me that you're going to do this right." And so back in the day, showing that it meant you did it right meant you would show up for 30 minutes before your shift started, unpaid, and you would still help. You would study the product. You'd learn the things. Like, it was like about as illegal as it gets. I don't know if it still happens that way today or not in retail, but you had to show up early and work, and then even stay late and work. And I reworked my way into it. Did a great job, in terms of that. And then fortunately, the Gap Kids was just coming along, and so they were opening a store in Tucson where I was working and living, going to school, and I applied for the management position and I got it. So again, that's that place where I got fired. My failure drove my success. And so, I worked in the store in Tucson. At that point, there were only 4 Gap Kids in the entire region. There was one in Tucson, not even Phoenix. There was one in Denver, one in Salt Lake, and one in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so it was interesting back then. We have Slack now. We literally had to have weekly conference calls, and it wasn't like you were in a conference room. It was like you were just on the phone. It was crazy.
I know. It's so weird now. Like, I feel so connected with my remote team, Slack, video, everything. Like,
yeah.
Shit, yep. We're writing a chapter in a book with you right now. We're doing it over video. It's like you could do anything.
And then from there, I always wanted to move to Denver, and so fortunately, Gap Kids, the Gap, the Gap. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Oh no, I got that wrong actually. I was working for the Gap in Tucson, and I wanted to go to Denver,
Okay.
and so I transferred to a Gap in Denver, and
Sweet.
then Denver opened the Gap Kids store, and that's where I got into management. Right.
Okay.
And it was my first taste of management and interviewing and hiring and training and sort of being responsible for it all. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's, that's really sort of where it all came together, but it all happened because I got fired.
Yeah. Oh, because that it all happened because you got fired. Because that give you the motivation to like hustle, work your ass off, do whatever it takes to be successful.
Absolutely. 100%.
That's awesome, man. That's great. So then you moved to Denver. Why did you want to go to Denver? Just heard it was amazing.
I had, it's interesting, when I was looking at colleges, my mom said, well, you should go look at Boulder, And I was like, no way, I'm not going where it's cold. I want to be where it's warm. So that meant, Arizona, California, and Florida. I actually applied to California, but I couldn't get in. So I went about as far west as I could, which was Arizona. And then one summer, a fraternity that I was in, we had our summer retreat in Denver, or in Vail. And I'd been skiing once. I'd been skiing to Salt Lake and to Colorado and loved the winter side of it. And I was like, well, let me go check this out in the summer. And I came back from that trip just going, I'm moving to Denver. I'm moving to Denver. I don't care what I do when I get out of college, I'm getting to Denver somehow. And that's when I was working for the Gap, and they had a store there, and I just did a transfer. They didn't even pay for my move. I just paid for it, and so that's how I got myself to Denver. And then I went into the Gap Kids role.
Okay.
So I never thought I'd leave Denver, to be honest with you.
Yeah, just loved it.
Yeah.
Is that's where Keenan's at, right?
It is.
Denver? Yeah. He loves it out there. Yes. It was funny. I was just on the phone with Sherry Leviton yesterday for a book interview, and she's out in Park City.
Yep.
And you're always going to Lake Tahoe too. I'm so jealous, man.
Not always, but every now and then.
Yeah, it's not that far from you, so it's easy. I'm here in Columbus, Ohio, or New York, and it's like we got no mountains.
I lived in Cleveland for a year. I feel you.
Yeah.
Columbus is the cool town, though. Let's be honest. Like, if I'm going to live in Ohio, it's going to be freaking Columbus, Ohio. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, Columbus is awesome. So, you're in Denver, and then you've been doing retail for a while. It sounds like you crushed the retail management game.
Yes.
What was your biggest success or learning experience, takeaway, level up from doing the retail and retail management?
I think understanding a sales process, understanding timing, you got to be there. I think the biggest thing I walked away from there when I think about that time was when I moved from the Gap to Gap Kids. I was the first manager they hired. I wasn't the store manager. I was going to be an assistant manager, but the store manager hadn't come yet. So I was the one who had to do all the interviews. So for 2 days straight, I had to go through all the applications, decide who I wanted to have come in for a face-to-face interview. And I had interviews scheduled every 30 minutes for like 2 days straight. And I think that was sort of my exposure to interviewing, right? And I think that's where I probably made a lot of mistakes, but I think I probably just learned a lot. And it's just one of those things that sticks out in my mind of like, oh my God, 2 days of interviewing. So, and I probably interviewed every half hour. I probably interviewed like 50 people in 2 days. Like, that's crazy.
What are the top things that you look for when you interview salespeople now?
Completely different. I'm looking more for a willingness to learn, probably more so. Okay. A willingness to be quiet, more so. I was never very successful at hiring the athlete or the former athlete. I don't know if it's because I'm not, the superstar athlete guy. I know a lot of sales leaders who are, and that's the model they go after. But I never had a good success with athletes. I also never had good success with musicians. From my style, I think I was a little bit more personal and personable. And so, let's be honest, it was probably more me than them, right? I was probably in that mode of, let me hire more people like me than let me find people who are different from me to make me better. But
now you're saying you hire for like willingness to learn, willingness to listen.
Yep. Willingness to listen. People who have courage and confidence, or have enough courage and confidence so that then I could encourage them to do more once I teach them, the strategies I teach, and I teach them the why factor. Um, I do think there needs to be a certain level of competitiveness. You do have to like to win, but it doesn't need to be cutthroat in my mind. I'm not looking for that. I don't want cutthroat salespeople. They're more cancerous and negative than anything. While they can be massively successful, the moment they have a downturn, they become very, very cancerous, in my opinion. And I just, I'll manage those people right out the door. So, but fortunately, for me, I'm not hiring people. So the thing to keep in mind too is that I haven't had to quote unquote hire anybody since in 6 years. So I'm sure there are things that, my mind is set a certain way, but I would assume things have changed in the last 6 years. I mean, certainly with a stronger and a much needed push for diversity, a much needed push for women in leadership positions. I think that alone has changed more so in the last 2 or 3 years. So I would always defer a little bit to, hey, here's what I look for on paper. Here's some questions I ask, but I'm not the guy to go to day in and day out and say, well, what do you look for in a salesperson?
Totally.
Right? Like,
well,
let's tell you about other people.
Right. So what did you do, after the Gap? Like, what was next? Why did you decide to leave the Gap?
I was tired of retail. I felt like I wanted a 9-to-5 Monday through Friday gig. I was tired of working weekends and every holiday that came around, I had to work.
So exhausting. Yeah. It's funny. Our social media community manager, Kristen, she just came from sales at interior design, Ethan Allen furniture stores.
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm just so excited I don't have to work Saturdays and Sundays.
Totally agree. Right.
I was like, I want you to have your work-life balance. Don't do that anymore.
So from there, I went to work for a company in Denver called Westward, which was the alternative weekly paper. Alternative doesn't mean right wing. I know today that's probably what it means, but this was the hippie magazine. This was the newspaper where, again, pre-internet. This is the late 80s. This is 90, 89, 90, 87, 89, 90, I think. Wait, no, 97, 98, 99. So pre-internet. And this newspaper comes out in towns all over, that's tells you what's going on at the bars, what's going on in the clubs, what's opening, what's not opening. It was the internet of the day. Yeah. And there are these cool papers that existed in every major city. Denver, we had Westward. New York was the Village Voice. Seattle has one. Houston has one. Miami has one. I'm sure Columbus has one. I don't know which one it was, but it existed. And so that was the coolest place to go work. Right. So I went to go work for them selling classified ads in the 90s. Right. Like this is, that little stuff in the back of the page. And I remember, again, my mom's a broker. This is one of my favorite stories. She doesn't remember it, but I was living in Denver. I thought I had this cool job that was really sort of cutting edge. We wrote the stories people didn't want to write. They were sort of like, interesting about the politics of the town or the school board, and just sort of going in depth.
Awesome.
And the Broncos would make the playoffs, and our editor would write something negative about the Broncos that week, right? Like just sort of really cutting edge, right? And I remember my mom calling me in the 90s, going, you should go. Your uncle lives in San Francisco, and there's this company out there I think you should pay attention to. And I think they're making money off these. Well, they're kind of like classified ads. And I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, yeah, what is that, Mom? And she goes, it's this company called Yahoo. I'm like, Mom, I'm not moving to California. I'm not taking that advice. Like, I was a Gen Xer. I was never going to take my parents' advice. Are you kidding? Right? Like, what do my parents know? And of course, think back to 97, 98, 99, probably right after the IPO of Yahoo. I'd probably be retired at this point if I'd have listened to the advice of my mother. Right. So my advice to people who are listening, please listen to your mom every now and then, not all the time, but a little bit. I probably still don't take enough of her advice these days, but that's just been the way I've been wired in my DNA. But that's one of those funny stories of failure, right? That you're like, shit.
You're like, because she pitched you on doing the Yahoo thing, and you're like, no way.
I was like, no way. Like, Mom, I'm not going there. I got the coolest job in the world. You don't understand. I love Denver. I'm never leaving Denver, blah, blah, blah. I came up with every excuse the excuse factory could come up with to not listen to my mother.
Okay, so that's funny. Yep, completely get
So
it.
anyway, so I was working for this newspaper company. In fact, just going quickly because I know you want to go through this, is I then went from San Francisco to Cleveland. So I went to Cleveland where we bought this paper. And
Well, hold on. The Denver thing, the Denver Classifieds was in Denver, right?
yeah,
And then they opened up a paper in San Fran.
they had one. So they knew I wanted to come here. Like, so we
Got
had
it. So you transferred. You're like, I crushed the Denver thing. I got to go to San Fran.
No, I crushed the Denver thing and they wouldn't promote me. So here again, thinking I was a failure. And so I actually ended up applying to get an MBA at the University of Colorado, Denver, and got into Denver. And I walked in and handed my resignation. And, you know, I was a little bit of a cocky son of a bitch back then. And
you were pissed because they wouldn't promote you.
Yeah, I was like, what? Well, and I'd like, let's keep in mind, I'd been there 4 years. I'd done inside sales, classified, outside sales, which we called retail, you know, going to the bars and clubs. And I was like, look, they're not promoting me. So there's clearly something I don't know. So I was really willing to sort of go, all right, well, let me go get this MBA and see what I can do.
Oh, that's sweet though, that you decided like, hey, it must be a skill gap. I'm going to go skill up.
Yeah. So anyway, so I recognized that. And I, you know, at this company, if you quit, you were out the door in an hour. Like you were just gone.
Wow.
And so I quit and they were all freaking out. Like, you can't quit. You can't quit. And I said, what are you talking about? Yes, I can. Like, you know, like I was sort of tired of the gamesmanship that they were playing. And I'm like, yeah, I can. And like, I'm going to go. I remember the publisher sitting behind me, behind the desk, said, let me go get this straight, Richard. So you're going to go get an MBA for the next 2 years. And you think you're going to be more successful than me? And I said, yeah, in about 10 years, I probably will. Like, and that was the game they tried to play. It was the mind fuck game of like, really, they were going to condescend a fucking MBA. And so I remember that. And I said, no. So I'm still quitting. I then go back to my cubicle in my office and they're like, well, Richard, let me figure something out. Don't go anywhere. Don't do anything. Just chill out, which was very unusual, very, very unusual. And the owner of the newspaper, this guy named Jim, calls me and I'm sitting in my cube and he goes, Ricky. And I went to college I was roommates with his son in college. So, you know, I had a personal relationship with him and I went by Ricky at the time. And I'm sitting there in this cubicle of all these people. And, you know, the owner of the company calls you and says, Ricky, what the fuck are you doing? Like that's, and I'm like, Jim, I can't really talk loudly. I'm in a cubicle. I'm like, look, you know, you guys haven't promoted me. There's something I need. I feel like I want to go get an MBA. I feel like it's gonna be good for my career. And he goes, look, you want a fucking MBA? I'll give you an MBA. I'm going to give you an MBA in the real world. I'm going to send you to Cleveland.
Oh shit.
And I go, Jim. I said, Jim, nobody fucking goes to Cleveland from Denver. They go from Cleveland to Denver.
Like, yeah, right.
And he's like, and then he pulled the string. Like I mean, the guy was a master manipulator. I'm 27 at this stage. And he goes, Ricky, look, you know, just give me 2 years because here's what's going to happen. You're going to go get that MBA, but you know what? Somewhere for the rest of your life, you're going to always go, well, I wonder what would have happened if I'd have stayed with the newspaper. And he just punched me in the gut, which is a super manipulative thing to do, right? Like so selfish, so self-involved. So anyway, fast forward or not fast forward, but I did not go get my MBA. I moved to Cleveland for a year. I crushed it in Cleveland.
Sorry.
And they knew that I wanted to come to San Francisco.
From
and after
Cleveland,
crushing it in Cleveland, they said, okay, Richard, go to San Francisco. Go to Ricky, go to San Francisco.
So you, and did they had a paper in Cleveland then that you went there and then sold for them?
They just bought a paper in Cleveland. Yeah.
Wow. Was it the Plain Dealer or something or no?
No, it was not the Plain Dealer. It was Cleveland Scene.
Cleveland Scene. Oh my gosh. I'm from Cleveland, guys. So that's why I asked.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I know Cleveland Scene. Yeah. I don't even know if this stuff still exists, by the way.
I don't know if that one still exists or not. I think they ended up selling it off, but yeah. But that was
so
back
you crushed it in Cleveland. And by the way, like when you say crush it, do you remember like why, how, like the big success, like what helped you crush it the most in Cleveland, in Denver, in San Francisco, selling for the classifieds? Like what's the thing that you were doing?
Yeah, so I mean, the beautiful thing when I went to Cleveland, like literally I was 27 years old and they said, go do it. There was no I adopted the processes I had learned in other places, but there was nobody there watching what I do. I just had to build it. And so it was super entrepreneurial, right? It was running my own business. I got to interview whoever I wanted. I got to hire whoever I wanted. I got to change the prices however I wanted. I got to run the numbers, in a way that I wanted. And so I just walked in the door and did what I knew how to do. I raised a bunch of prices that were ridiculous. They're it's just very interesting in how those papers worked, and I was able to sell out. I remember, the back page of the paper was, all these ads that looked like classified ads, and I remember, the first time I sold out the back page, and we generated like $3,000 a week once we officially sold it out.
Awesome.
And I emailed, Jim, the owner, and I said, hey, we just sold out the back page of the paper for the first time. We cleared $3,000. And his response was, great job. Now raise the fucking prices. Right. It was just it was that kind of culture. Like, it really was that kind of culture.
So then you moved to San Francisco after you crushed Cleveland.
Yeah. So then I came to San Francisco and was fairly successful in San Francisco. And then I had a real hard time. And I'm very happy to talk about this, but I woke up one day utterly depressed. Like, I could not get out of bed depressed. It's the first time I sort of acknowledged that I was a functioning depressed person. It had always been there all my life. And I talk about it a lot, but I literally could not get out of bed. And when I worked for the paper, I was working 12 and 13 and 14-hour days. Like, we worked hardcore. Yeah. Right. And I called my mom and I'm like, Mom, I can't get out of bed. I don't know what to do. And, I was probably 30 at that point. And she said, well, why don't you come home? Why don't you just, pack it up and come home and we'll take care of you here? And I said, no way. I said, I can't do that. She said, why? And I said, because if I do that, then the city wins. And that was my mentality. I was not going to let this city, keep in mind, I grew up in Macon, Georgia. I then went to Tucson. I then went to Denver. I then went to Cleveland. So I sort of grew into these bigger cities. And finally I got to this major metropolis of San Francisco, and I was not going to let San Francisco beat me.
Yeah, and do you, when you talk to press, like, were you doing well in sales and just other facets of your life? Like, you just didn't feel?
Oh yeah, totally. So I was, first of all, I had hair. It was probably 20 or 30 pounds lighter. Well,
I think you look great now, man.
Oh, thank you. Well, look, I was straight. I was single. I had my own apartment in San Francisco. And I had no game when it came to dating. Like, I just didn't do it well. And I know that, after all the therapy and stuff, I know a lot of that stems from my parents and, sort of what I learned and my own self-esteem and lack thereof. And I think probably even in the beginning when you were saying all those nice things, it makes me feel really awkward because I'm like, I don't know, I haven't done anything,
Yeah.
So anyway, so it just there was no reason I should be, if you think about it on paper, like, I was successful, I was running a business and I was making money and, I was saving a ton of money and I was, in this great city where, a significant number of the population is not heterosexual. So, my odds should be better at finding a woman to date or have a girlfriend or find someone to get married. And it just didn't work that way for me. So I threw myself into therapy. I ended up quitting the job at the newspaper after a while because I just couldn't handle the pressure. I didn't know how to create work-life balance at that point. I didn't know that even existed. And, I didn't have a mentor. Like, the idea of a mentor as you see it today, I don't think it existed back then. So let me rephrase that. It existed. It was not easy for me to think about or find. I probably didn't want the help. And certainly I think mentorships in the early 2000s probably were more aligned for the traditional big companies, maybe not where I was, right? Certainly not the organization I was at. And I'd been with that, by that point, I'd been with the newspaper company 7 years, which, that's a lifetime if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so I went through that and started working for some other startups and getting into the startup world. And then the .com bomb hit, right?
Oh, and just to take back, because I think a lot of, like, it's incredible that you've amassed this amount of success going through such a hard time, right? Where everything in sales is going great. And it sounds like you got to this point where, like, Yeah, sales was good. Other parts of your life were bad in your eye view, and you were
Yep,
like stuck, and it's
completely.
like shit. Like yesterday I felt stuck, you know,
Yep.
like like salespeople, entrepreneurs, marketers, they get stuck and they get depressed like a lot because entrepreneurship, sales is so hard, the rejection, the pressure, the negativity. How did you went to look for help? Like, how did you get unstuck? Because that's almost like a secret in and of itself. Of like, you
Yeah, I
said that
think
I'm not going to let the city get a hold of me. Like, what else was? How did you get
yeah.
through that?
So I just knew that something wasn't right. Um, I had been through a little bit of therapy post college uh, with myself and a woman I was dating, and and again, I think I had certain mindsets about dating and the opposite sex and what relationships should look like that were probably not the healthiest at that time of my life. Um, Certainly something I'm very conscious of today. And I didn't, believe me, I didn't treat anybody wrong. I didn't hit anybody. I was not that. Don't misinterpret what I'm saying. Just I was 27 and fucked up. Right. What else can I say? Um, and so I knew that I needed help. I knew that I woke up in that bed that day and literally could not get out of bed, like physically could not get out. And so I rolled over and called my mom, and she said, well, let me call around. And she found someone who knew someone. Um, I still see this woman to this day. Like I still see her, almost weekly if I'm not traveling, and she's a big part of me figuring out who I am and a big part of my success in my mind, so that I could focus on all those other things. And a big part of the reason I have a great wife and I have two great boys, and
It's
that
amazing.
I can build upon that. So I don't think it's in my opinion, I don't think it's the rejection of sales and the negativity of being stuck and all that. That's nothing, in my opinion. This depression for me was a part of me since I was a kid, for a very, very long time. And I can't speak for everybody who's ever been through their own mental health issues, but my experience when I talk to people is it's always been there. It's not because of the job that depression was there. It was just sort of underneath all this other stuff for all these years. But I'm also happy to be re-educated if someone has a different opinion of that. I'm certainly not a
Yeah.
psychotherapist by
Well,
any
it
means.
sounds like you were able to. So you worked your network to find someone that could help you out, and they were
Yeah.
a pivotal point to breaking through you
Oh
being
yeah.
stuck and being in that down
Yeah.
place. And then so they bring you up and you're like, I got to change I got to change whatever I'm doing, whatever
Yeah.
I'm in. And you're like, I'm leaving the newspaper, even though I've been successful, and you decide to check out some of these hot startups.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I go. So I go.
but you did it right in the .com bust, right?
Yeah. So I literally
Fuck.
got a new job, and 6 weeks later I got laid off.
Brutal, dude. And that was the first time you're leaving the newspaper, going into what was that, tech startup or like?
Yeah, I don't even remember what it was at that point, to be honest with you. I couldn't tell you the name of that
Yeah,
company, but they
yeah,
clearly are not around today. Otherwise, I'd remember.
yeah.
Um, and that didn't work out. But the company that hired me to work there felt really bad because I'd asked them very specifically in the interviews about run rate, cash. Is there enough cash to keep me around for a year?
Oh, it's
And they
smart.
lied. I mean, they said
Smart that
yes.
you asked that stuff.
What's that?
I said it's smart that you asked that stuff. A lot
I
of
had some
salespeople
friends who were
don't.
working for startups, and they were like, "This is the stuff you need to be aware of." So I'd done a little
What's
research.
the
But yeah,
burn? What's the churn? The MRR, the ARR. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I don't even think it was ARR at that point. Um, and so I went to I that didn't work out, but this company that put me there had another company that they were working with, and so they placed me in that place, and that actually became a better gig anyway. I went
Awesome.
from being a manager of a small team to now being the director of 3 teams with 3 managers underneath me. So it actually, that in hindsight, that incident became a true blessing.
Yep.
So, and that company was called the Learning Company. So if people ever did Mavis Beacon teaches typing or Reader Rabbit or Where in the World is Carmen San Diego or
yeah, yeah,
Pix
yeah.
or Oregon Trail,
I
like
fucking loved Oregon Trail, man.
so
That was
I
like my favorite. That,
Yeah, all of a sudden everybody gets typhoid on the trip to Oregon. So that was my sales team selling to the schools back in the day, sort of in those early 2000s when gamification was entering the school world, as were computers, and there was a lot of money being thrown at that stuff. So it was a pretty interesting time to be a part of that. So
that was right when computers were hitting schools, right? And then you guys came out with all
totally.
these learning games. You guys had to have crushed it. I feel like everyone was buying that stuff, right? Or maybe
you still had goals, but look, selling to the K-12 market is not easy.
I was just about to say the only bad part is you're selling to the education market who's broke.
There's good and bad to it. The good of selling to the education market is, one, it's very altruistic, right? I knew in the time that, hey, selling this stuff was good for kids. Like even you were like, oh my God, I loved Oregon Trail, right? Like that worked, right? That there was something valuable and meaningful to our job, which I think I start to see more of now. Regardless of what you're selling, the companies realize that matters.
Yep.
That was the good part. You knew who your decision makers were. You knew how much money they had because it was federal money. It's publicized. There were literally books that gave you, here's the superintendent, here's the head of this curriculum, here's the head of that curriculum, here's their budget, here's how much they spend per student on computer and all that kind of stuff. So you had all that detail that we relish for today because it's public money. So when you sell to that sector, getting the research done even today is powerfully amazing because it's out there.
Yep.
So that part was easy. The biggest problem you had was really change management, right? We had window, you had people on, it was 2003 and they were still on Windows 97, right? Or Windows XP. Like I remember when XP came out, the teachers didn't want to change how they do stuff, right? Like that's just, and that still goes on today, right?
Yep.
They don't want to take the risk, right? So they don't want to lose their job and lose their lifelong pension and their lifelong health care, right? They're very risk averse.
So was the biggest learning experience or success or failure there like overcoming the sales objection of change management for you?
I don't think I saw it that way back then, but yes, that's what it was. And I was a different kind of manager. I was sort of a by the numbers manager. I wasn't the conversation manager that I am today. Like I didn't relish and coach the conversations like I do today. I was a little bit more of that aggressive, look, you need this, take it, leave it, whatever, but don't waste our time kind of stuff.
Were you showing them like, hey, here's how the kids can learn before the games and here's after and how it's going to improve?
Yeah, it was very
feature
benefit driven, right? Okay. It was very feature benefit driven. So some of my best salespeople, though, particularly if you're in the K-12 market or you're selling in the education market, some of my best salespeople were former teachers. The teachers who were smart enough to get out to realize they weren't going to last there forever are great salespeople, and they're great at selling to teachers. Like they're genius at it because they can walk the walk and talk the talk and not sound like Richard, right? Not sound like a salesperson.
Yep. Educate the buyer and then get them to buy. Okay. Right. So you learn how to overcome change management, and then you decide
empathy was big back then. I mean, it is now, but that's where you really, those teachers who knew how to sell to teachers were empathetic to those people.
Empathy. Got it.
Right. It was huge.
And what's when you say empathy, like just for the audience, what do you mean by empathy? And
walking in their shoes, right? Being able to draw a similar experience, right? Like someone could be empathetic to me about, my mental health issues, but not necessarily be depressed. They could say, God, Richard, I've never had it like you did, but I've had a couple of bad days where I was like, I don't know. And that's empathetic to me, right? They don't have to be as depressed as I was or am sometimes. Like they don't have to be that. That's empathy, right? Just acknowledging that piece. In fact, I was reading, and I'm going to read you what I quote. So I was reading for the second time, Never Split the Difference, right? And I took this quote out about why listening works. And this is what it says. Psychotherapy research shows that when individuals feel listened to, they tend to listen to themselves more carefully and to openly evaluate and clarify their own thoughts and feelings. Wow. So if I empathize with you, you then become more open to changing your own thought process. That's change management, right? That's empathy. That's how empathy really works. And so it was just an interesting quote that I'm going to probably start talking and teaching towards a little bit more as I teach people about active listening and stuff like that.
That's great. So then you decide, what made you decide to go to PC Guardian after the learning company?
That was an interesting story. So PC Guardian, this was fascinating. Hold on, I don't want to lose that quote. So I got
I love that.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Um,
And
so
the book that Richard was talking about was Never Split the Difference.
yeah, by Chris Voss.
Chris Voss. Yep.
Yeah,
Awesome.
great book. The interesting thing about it is that 90% of that stuff that's in the book already exists in the world long before the FBI started using it. So Chris was just smart enough to put it into a business format for us all. So, so the company was a company called The Learning Company.
Mm-hmm.
They also had some offices in Iowa, and they wanted to move everybody from Marin, California to Iowa. And because the cost of labor was cheaper, it was by half, right?
Wow.
And they told me they were going to do this, and I'm like, dude, I've already done my thing in the Midwest. I've been to, I've been to Cleveland. I'm not doing Iowa, right?
Yeah.
And they said, no, you don't have to go. We'll have a job for you here. We just need to help you get it started up there. So I had to literally lie to my 30 salespeople, and I had to go interview and hire people in Iowa. When the salespeople found out that there was a team being hired in Iowa, I had to lie to them to say their jobs were safe. You're going to be fine. Brutal. I had to literally carry toe the company line. And it was brutal. It was hard on me. And so we eventually, moved everybody to Iowa. We eventually let go of the people in California. We kept a very small team in California that I could manage, but I still had a manager here who was managing them. Like, it was maybe 6 people, a manager, and me. And all of a sudden I had nothing to do. Like, literally, like I just sat, like, literally projects that should take, 2 hours I drone out to 2 days. And I couldn't find another gig in the company that I wanted to go take. Like, that was hard. Like, there was nothing else available. They wanted me to go be a reseller for them down in Austin or Round Rock with Dell and carry a quota. And I'm like, why would I do that? Like, that's not my skill set. That's not what I want to do anymore. So I left there and found this great job at a company called PC Guardian, and went through there. And I took them from about 3 million to 8 million in a matter of about 3 or 4 years. Damn. Which was really, really good.
Yeah, that's sick.
Yeah. And opened up a whole retail channel.
And what is PC Guardian, just so the audience, like,
so PC Guardian was eventually bought by Symantec. Well, let me rephrase that. PC Guardian had 2 companies. They had a physical computer security company called PC Guardian that was literally the locks that you buy for your laptops, right?
Oh, wow. Like the hardware locks.
Yeah, hardware, hardware.
Not like digital locks. Got it.
Right. They had a separate software division called Guardian Edge that encrypted your laptop at the hard disk level. Right. So, and again, this is 2002, 3-ish era, right? So they were using the money from the hardware stuff to support the software stuff. Very conservative company, did not go out for funding for a very, 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 very long time.
I love that. You don't see that anymore.
Yeah, got embroiled in a lawsuit with a company called Kensington over who actually created
my hardware here is Kensington.
Yeah, exactly. Well, some of it's probably PC Guardian. I could probably look at the flang on your lock if you had one and tell you if that was ours or not.
That's funny.
Kensington sued the company for about 10 years. Like, it's one of those things where the big company is suing the small company, hoping to drag it out as long as they can to bleed the small company dry. We were all set to win this lawsuit. Like, I got deposed. Like, I'd never been deposed in a lawsuit. That was kind of cool.
Wow.
That was funny. And we were all set to win. Kensington still, it's Acco Brands now. They claim that they invented
Acco Brands. That's right.
Yeah, they claim they invented the security lock on a computer. And I know the fact that they did not. They absolutely didn't. Actually, Apple did with the original Macs. But that's what big companies do. They sue small companies, and maybe someone will listen to me and send me a cease and desist order. But F you. And we were all set to go to trial, and then the recession hit, literally. And so in 2007, everything started to go to hell in a handbasket. In 2008, I got laid off again. And it was not a performance issue. It was literally a look, the lawsuit's bleeding us dry. People are not refreshing their computers, so we're not selling as many of the hardware locks. And unfortunately, we got to let you go.
Out of cash. Yeah.
So that was 2008. I just bought a house. I just had a baby 3 months before.
Nah,
right?
That's
Like
tough.
I just celebrated like my 5th or 6th anniversary there. And so I was all panicked, and it was November. Like, where the hell am I going to get a job, in the holidays?
Yeah.
And I grinded it out, and it was just fascinating. Like I ended up having a job by January 1st. There was no hole in my resume.
It's
right.
awesome. And the one question that I got to ask is, you took the company from 3 million to 8 million in 3 years, 36 months. It's really fast to drive that type of revenue growth. I don't know what you guys were selling, like the AOV for PC Guardian, but what was the secret or the strategy, like the takeaway of like, how did you go from 3 to 8?
Well, that was truly a team effort, right? Like, that's the one thing I loved about this company, was that we had decent marketing. We had a strong channel presence. We double and tripled down on channel, so that we could resell through places like SHI and CDW and all these other different places. We built a retail channel. In 6 months, I built a retail channel that grossed $500,000 in revenue into the college market. So that was pretty cool. So there were a couple of just stringent plays. And I also think they just didn't have strong management at that up until then. They just didn't have somebody sitting there listening to calls and coaching and doing, the nuts and bolts of it. Right. People get to $2 or $3 million in revenue, and they think it's going to be great to get to 10 million. That's actually probably the easiest 10 million to get to if you just focus. People start to lose focus, I think, when they hit that $3 million mark, because they think they got it made in the shade. And they don't double down. What they end up doing is they end up becoming too spread, too thin, in my opinion, too quickly.
And like, do you mean
take on more than they should, rather than owning the market that they should own?
So you think that they try to go after, like, because this is something that scares me, like, as we fast grow and I want to get to 8 figures and then 9 figures, like I want to do it year over year. Like,
Right.
Are you saying like, don't try to like go after every single industry in the world, or
Correct.
like, okay,
100%.
like just keep doubling down on the industries that you absolutely know the personas, know the needs, the buyer, the products. You've got everything that you need to blow that out of the water.
Double it down until you own 75% of the market. Wow. The new markets will actually find you, and I've got great examples of that. But that's kind of like where the retail thing found us. Where I sort of discovered this college market. There's 2 main distributors that sell to the college bookstores, and it took me 3 years to convince our owners. Like I said, they were conservative. That like, hey, let's, instead of selling this black cable, let's make it blue or green or pink. And they were like, nobody's going to buy a pink one. I'm like, are you kidding me? Go put it in a college bookstore. You're not selling to the student. You're selling to the parent who just spent $2,000 on the laptop, and the parent's going to make them buy a lock. And and again, I don't mean to be gender biased. I apologize, but the girls are going to want the pink, and the boys are going to want the blue or the green, right?
Yeah.
And it was a success, but it took me 3 years to convince them to freaking do it.
Wow.
And so that was a challenge.
That's awesome. So, okay, so the biggest thing was the team effort, was the doubling down, don't get spread too thin, innovate on product, convince management that, to make the necessary changes to drive the revenue. And then you said you got laid off, and then you got placed in like a month, 2 months later at
I did probably one of the hardest things I did. I called a former rep who'd worked at PC Guardian. And so he had reported to me, and I was like, do you know of anything? Like, that's hard for a VP of sales to do, to pick up the phone and call their sales rep and say, do you know about anything? Right. That was a big ego check for me. And turns out, he's like, yeah, why don't you call this buddy of mine? Turns out to be Scott Lease, who I think you know at this point.
Yeah. High transactional selling, right?
Yeah. So Scott hired me, and I went from being a VP of sales to being a sales manager of a small team. I went from making, $100,000 in base salary plus to 50 grand in base salary.
Wow.
They didn't even have benefits at that point. And I just took the job because I didn't want a hole in my resume. And it was tough. It was tough for my wife and I. Like believe me, we were never going to be poor and lose our house. We had a strong support system, but it's really humbling to do that. And so that's where I met Scott, and Scott's now one of my closest friends.
Yeah, it's funny. I
Our
was
wives are
just
good.
thinking about how I got to call him earlier
Yeah.
today because we're so high transactional sales, and I'm like, I got to call Scott.
He's the guy. Call Scott, man. He knows it. He's built it 3 or 4 times now.
Yeah.
And so we've become great friends. Our wives have become friends. We have boys the same age. Last year at Thanksgiving, we all went to Costa Rica for a vacation together with the families, and actually that's where the genesis of Surf and Sales came along. That Scott came up with, and which I'm still waiting to see if you're coming.
I know.
So come on, surfandsales.com, free plug.
Surf and Sales.
Come on, we only got 3 spots left.
You were super humble. You're like, hey, I'm gonna get a job, and then like you took it, even though it was a 50% decrease in salary. You grinded it out. What were some learning experience? Because you were responsible. I think was that where you were driving the call center, or no? That was
no. The call center was after that. So there it was really hardcore about the pitch, knowing your pitch really well. And I think that's one of Scott's true genius moves is his ability to write a pitch. If you don't know Scott, I'm going to plug him a little bit. He wrote a great book called Addicted to the Process. Definitely has mastered the transactional sale environment, has also mastered the SaaS sale and even the enterprise sale, in my opinion. And what people don't know about Scott is that Scott actually has a degree in psychology. That's his undergrad degree. And if you think about all the stuff we've talked about, empathy and listening and being able to communicate to people, it's what makes Scott so good is that, one, I think he's naturally wired that way. And then 2, he now has the education to support it. And then he realized that, look, I'm going to go make some money. So awesome. He went into sales and he put it all together. And that's why I think he's such a mastermind. And we joke around a lot about, we compete against each other on ridiculous stuff all the time, but and probably more me than him. I probably talk more smack to him than he does to me. And he's 10 years my junior, but I really look up to him. I really go to him for a lot of advice. He helps me check myself. When I've had down moments, he's picked up the phone and been there for me. And respectfully, I've done the same for him. If he's gotten a question, I always answer it, and we support each other in a lot of different ways, both professionally and personally. So, awesome. Just a super smart guy to follow and a super smart guy to know. And I'm blessed to have him as a good friend and mentor and co-conspirator, whatever you want to call it.
That's amazing. So you're at the .next, right?
Yeah.
And then what was the big learning experience?
You did really good research, dude. Well done.
Yeah. The .net. So that's when you and Scott kind of nailed the pitch. Like, that's the big takeaway. When you say nail the pitch, like, what does that mean?
Like, so Scott he's a genius, right? So we were selling something that didn't exist. And he wrote the pitch.
Oh yeah. Well, it is .next. So let's.
No, I don't even want to go there. It's gone at this point. It's another notch in the belt of amazing learning experiences, and we'll call it that. But Scott had built this search engine. Well, Scott didn't build it. .next built this search engine that combined Google, Bing, and Yahoo all together. So whenever you searched, you could get all the results in one place.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And thinking it was pretty cutting edge, and it was. Or it was creatively cutting edge, I should say. And so instead of selling ads, AdWords, we actually sold the license to the word. So if you wanted to buy the word, Labradoodle puppies, nobody could. We would sell you position 1, 2, 3, or 4, and this is how much you paid, and you paid that for life. You never had to pay another dime for it, as opposed to pay-per-click.
Wow.
And so that was the goal of this company. And so before the platform was even finished being built, they had screenshots and a demo that you walked people through. I wouldn't even call it a demo, but you
A
walked them
prototype.
through what it looked like. And Scott built a pitch that literally people would use, and it was word for word, pitch for pitch. Scott had it nailed down.
Love
And
it.
we drove that company. And so that really taught me the value of a good pitch. Really, really taught me the value of a good pitch. Scott and all of us, we drove that company from 0 to about $7 or $8 million in
Damn.
ARR in about a year and a half.
It's nuts, dude.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And then it came all crashing down.
Because the search engines were like, what the fuck, or what?
No, there was more legal issues that, again, it was interesting that, the founder and owner, some of it was legal, some of it was the ability, you just can't scale. Like, we refused to buy a CRM, right? Reps had to go find their own leads.
Stupid.
Phone number. Like, it was just ridiculous. It was old school shit.
Stupid. You're just wasting time and money, not growing, doing stupid stuff like that.
So anyway, went through that and got laid off again through another downturn. Although Scott at that point got me promoted from just a sales manager to operations manager. So I really started he noticed my strength in operations. And so he was able to get me promoted to a director role, which was really, a great benefit for me. Got my salary back up. So that then when I went back to the job market again, after about a year and a half, I now had a director title again, so I could at least try to go for a director role or a VP role if I wanted.
That's incredible, man. And where you went to the call center. Like you went to a big call center.
Old school call center, dude. Like this
70-person outbound call center, dude. That's awesome.
I mean,
I love call centers for some reason. I don't know why. I mean, like I'm an enterprise sales guy.
Let me explain this before you say that. So this call center was based in Oakland. We sold newspaper subscriptions.
Back to the newspapers.
Late at night at 6 or 7 o'clock at night and interrupting your dinner to buy the Chronicle or the Boston Globe or whatever.
Yeah.
And the business model for this place, a smart business model, was that, they wanted to keep it at minimum wage. And they decided that they could go and hire people who were coming out of jail and on probation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right? Because these people had to go get a job. They needed a job. They had to show up for their job, right? They're on probation. But you can imagine there's not a lot of these are not a lot of, for whatever reason, they're not college educated people in most instances, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting crowd.
They traditionally come from a cycle of poor. They were often just had never even had a chance, I think. So it did open my eyes to like what the other side of the world looks like, right? Like this is a world I don't live in, right? But I had everything from people who were raging alcoholics. I would find bottles of booze hidden in the bathroom, in the laundry, in the trash can, at the bottom of the trash can, underneath the plastic bag so that it didn't get cleaned out. I found people's clothes hidden behind their cubicles because they were technically homeless, right? Like it was not a great environment in many, many ways. But it taught me a lot. It taught me about running a huge call center, amazing software, some real honest, hardworking people though. Like there were people there definitely were sort of trying to buck the system a little bit, but there were also people who were like, man, I got to get my shit together and get my life on track. So
what was the biggest takeaway running the call center? Like for sales?
I don't want to do it again. I would never run it again. The biggest takeaway was, again, understanding the having a super strong process, having strong scripting, having the right software in place. Also understanding the psychology of our best salespeople were really good. Like, if you think about it, these, for lack of a better, not all of them, but a lot of these people, they'd sort of, through their own experiences had sort of figured out how to navigate the system with stretching the truth as far as you can before it's called a lie, and straight up lying and straight up manipulating. Right. So, and I don't think they manipulated people to buy a newspaper, believe me, but they knew how to talk to people. They knew how to empathize, and they knew how to really connect with them and sell value. And, we had to sell a big part of our pitch was, look, every week you're going to get about $25 to $75 in coupon savings in the Sunday classifieds, right? That alone's worth it. Plus, you want a more in-depth story, right? Like, it was again feature benefit, but it was just interesting, right? So it was just an interesting time.
And you're like, I got to get out of there. And then that's when you joined API, or I'm sorry, Mastery. API
no, there's another small stop along the way, but I don't even put it on my resume at this point. Back to education, but it lasted about 6 months. And then I ended up at Mastery, right? And it was interesting. The day that I interviewed at Mastery, I also interviewed at DocuSign. And technically DocuSign was my first choice, but
both are great companies.
Both are great companies. I think I messed up that interview a lot, in a lot of different ways. But I also thought the guy who interviewed me was a little bit of a cocky jerk.
When you say you messed up the interview, what do you mean? Like how? What do you mean?
So I got back from the recruiter. Like, I hadn't been using DocuSign, so I loved it. I knew what it was. Like, the recruiter was all in. I was all in. And this guy was interviewing me, and he was throwing scenarios at me that, one, didn't exist, and two, he didn't like my answer to them, but legally that's what you had to do. Like, he was like, so what would you do if you found out today someone was embezzling your money, right? I'd say, well, first thing I'd do is I got to call you. He's like, no, let's say I'm not available. All right, I got to go to HR. No, HR's not available. What are you going to do? I'm like, well,
what does this have to do with
write it out so I can talk to HR. He's like, no, you should fire them right there on the spot. And I was like, well, you can't do that in California. He's like, what do you mean? So in California, if you fire somebody, at least, this was 8 years ago, I assume it's still the same, you had to cut them their final check that day. You don't get time to delay to do that. And he's like, well, that's just not how we operate. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm like, well, I don't know what to fucking tell you. And that's the law. And if you want to, skirt the law, then that's okay too. But that's what you're supposed to do. And so apparently the feedback I got was, that I dropped the F-bomb in an interview at a startup. And I was like, really? That's your feedback? So I think I intimidated the guy. At least that's the story I tell myself.
Yeah, that's awesome.
that I knew a little bit more about what to do in weird scenarios than he did. So anyway, so that one I sort of shot myself in the foot, which then turned into Mastery. So Mastery became the thing. And I didn't have a clue about APIs. I didn't know a thing. And I think I got that job. I think one of the reasons I got that job was I went on the interview and it was apparent I didn't know a lot. So I went and read one of their white papers and I rewrote it in a way that I understood it to say, hey, and the guy's name is Rock. His name's Rock Versace. He's a great, great sales leader. And I just said, look, I really want to come work for you. I know I don't know a lot about APIs, but here's what I did. I did this and I taught myself about the APIs. And I remember the email. He's like, Richard, I'm really blown away. That's really impressive. And I just, thank you. I self-educated myself. And I think that was probably the first time I ever did that for a job interview at that level. And so it ended up working out really, really well for me. So
that's awesome. And that was right when APIs were just getting out into the market, like brand new.
They were out, but people didn't understand them. They didn't have, the value of APIs at that point. People, they knew that there was value in them, but they didn't know how to use them themselves, right? So it fell into an IT project as opposed to a business development project, which is where I think a lot of APIs really need to be. They're much more biz dev than they are IT, but they're complex enough that, a quote unquote traditional biz dev person may not understand the technology side. So it defaults to IT.
And then I know you were doing lead gen there and sales ops and lead generation. So like, what are the biggest successes, learning experiences for sales?
Yeah, I think, on the lead gen side, I think I crushed it. In 6 months, we hired this team. This is a funny story. They hired me. I show up on my first day and they're like, great, we're going to build this team in Boston. I'm like, Boston? I'm not moving to Boston. And they didn't ask me. Nobody asked me to move. They're like, no, don't worry about it. We're gonna build it there, and we're gonna put them in our VC's office because that's what our VC wants to do, and they want to use us as a test module for their other portfolio companies to see if they could actually, Boston's a great market to hire SDRs and salespeople. So if they could sort of work it through with us, it could become a scalable thing for the VCs. That's smart for the VC because then it's good for their portfolio companies. They're the right VC to say, hey, look, we've done this 3 or 4 times. We can help you build this team, right? Like they were much more hands-on VC. It was OpenView, by the way.
Oh, I love those guys.
Yeah, OpenView is so good. Like
I
they
love
really
those
nail it.
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when they were first talking to us, and they're like,
Yeah, so
"Man, we
they're
love
really good.
Seamless." Like,
If you're talking to Scott, tell him Richard says hello. Um, who are you talking to? Or if you can't, I know you can't say that. So
there's like 4. But I mean, they love sales tech, which is great, because that's where we're at. So
yeah,
it's fun, but yeah. Anyways,
yeah. There's a couple of men and women over there that I've really appreciated a lot through the years, and
yeah. So they wanted to build this SDR team in Boston
in their offices
to book appointments.
Yep.
For you guys and then for the other portfolio companies.
No, just for us. It was our team. They were our employees.
Got it.
They just wanted to base them out of Boston. We thought it'd be less expensive to base them out of Boston than it would be out of San Francisco.
Awesome.
We thought we'd have an easier talent pool to pull from, which I agree with at that time. And we also, it was an experiment for them, right? So, and it worked out well. Within 6 months, we ended up having to hire a manager to be on the ground there. So after 6 months of building that team, I then became head of sales operations, which was good and bad. That was the beginning of the end. I was given a job. I was given an offer to either go run a sales team or go do sales ops. And I felt like I'd built enough sales teams that I should go do sales ops and learn something.
Okay.
And I'm a little bit operationally minded, but I'm not detail oriented enough. I don't think, right? Like I get the operation side, but I don't want to go to the detail. And unfortunately, so I had that job for about a year, running ops, which was good.
That's awesome.
But eventually we ended up letting go of a couple of ops people left and went to different departments. And so all of a sudden I was a one-person ops role who was in charge of, I was in charge of some of the interviewing, the training. I was in charge of tracking the revenue. I was in charge of Salesforce.
Nice.
I was in charge of the SDR team. I talked to a couple people. They're like, Richard, you're like a VP. Like if you're doing all that, that's ridiculous.
Yep.
I was also in charge of like the books, like tracking the revenue that comes in and how we book it and all that stuff. And I'm like, I'm not an accountant. So after about a year of that,
what was the success driver of this lead gen team? Like you made this lead gen team super success, the SDR team super successful at Mastery. Like then you had to grow it, then you had to lead it even more, take over more responsibility. Like what was the big secret or strategy with that?
Process, scripting got really strong.
So it's like the same thing as before, as like what you learned at the call center, what you learned with Scott, and what you learned, like you got to have the process, you got to have the scripts, you got to have the pitch. Like sounds like everything that you did throughout your career, like gave you that thing to do the next thing better and smarter.
Yeah. And that's where I met John Barrows. We hired John Barrows to come in.
Sweet. JB. Yeah, he was just on the show yesterday.
Yeah. So John, obviously is a good friend and mentor of mine. That's where I met him. And so it all became about part of that process, right? And then eventually about a year later, unbeknownst to me, Mastery was going to go through an acquisition with Intel. I stuck through January to help do the sales kickoff, and then I got laid off, which I wasn't surprised. It did not catch me off guard. I was certainly disappointed because I felt like, I'd done what I could do, but wasn't given a lot of the support I wanted or needed in a lot of ways. But they really hugged me out the door. They really gave me a super long runway of, some time and healthcare costs covered. And like, they really did a nice job. So I can't be disrespectful. And ultimately, that was my last real job before I became a consultant. So I can't necessarily complain that happened, really.
And then, I think, now you've been running the Harris Consulting Group ever since, and you've consulted with, hundreds of different companies from Gainsight and, all these massive level 11, dynamic signal, social cores, data hug, Revel, like all these farm logs, Pandadoc, Terminus, like these are all amazing, amazing companies. So, to bring it full circle, because I know now the audience is dying to know. I mean, we've gone over a lot of strategies, themes, takeaways that have helped you maximize your sales success and level up. But sales secrets from the top 1%, where the world's best sales experts share their secrets to sales success. My man, Richard Harris, if you had one top secret, one sales secret to share, to yourself when you're first starting out in sales, to someone that you just hired to maximize their sales success, for the audience out there dying to know, what would your top sales secret be?
Well, I'm gonna interrupt this broadcast a little bit and defer to you a little, because people don't know our story, and I've told you this, and I've been dying to tell this story, is that, and it's something you taught me, which is about tenacity. I remember when I started building my business a few years ago, this guy Brandon kept bugging the shit out of me. Like you would comment on everything I did. You'd say something. Sometimes you'd disagree with me, and I'd be like, who is this kid? Like, who thinks he can come in and do this? After all, I'm Richard freaking Harris. I built my own brand, and this is where my ego gets in my way, right? Like, we all have this challenge. But you kept coming after me, dude. You kept coming after me.
Was it always in disagreement though? Because
No,
typically I don't always disagree.
I'd have to, look, I'm not going to go back and check my LinkedIn, but there was something about it. There was something about the way you were positioning it or saying something that just, for whatever reason, I don't know why. Maybe it was, and look, it ain't you, it's Richard, right? Yeah. If someone rubs you the wrong way, it's not them, it's you. It means you got a problem. And so I was just like, who is this guy, Brandon? I don't even know who this kid is, and whatever. And so
I'm dying to know, like, what I commented on years ago.
I'm dying to know too. But I will tell you what you taught me. I'll tell you what you taught me was to shut up in my own head, get out of my way, let someone else have the mic, let someone else have an opinion, and be respectful of that moment. And that was something that I learned from you before I even had a conversation with you, right? And so I find it super funny and humorous that's where our friendship and relationship started, and you helped me sort of check myself, because I think every now and then we need that. So I think what's my big takeaway? It can be about the process, and it can be about having a pitch, and it can be about empathy and listening. All that stuff matters, but I think the most important thing that matters is, let someone else have the mic. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room. I get in the conversation with people who are smartest person in the room, and I'm like, oh, I deal with it. I know how to deal with it because it's business, but I can tell who they are. I can recognize it pretty quickly, and when they need to be the smartest person in the room, you kind of have to let them, but it's annoying. And so I think I went through that syndrome, and I think you helped check me out of it. I think you helped me kind of go, wait a minute, Richard, you're not all that. Yeah, you've done some good things, and you built a nice little business, but don't think you know it all, right? So for you, I have to say thank you. So
that's crazy, dude. That's crazy. Cause like,
anyway, so back to your original question.
Yeah.
What's the 1%? I think that it still comes back to what you say, and it's what I teach, is that, you got to earn the right to ask questions, right?
Okay. Earn the right to ask questions.
Yeah. That's the key to sales, right?
That's
if you got a good pitch, that's great, but you got to earn the right.
Earn the right.
You got a good product, that's great, but you got to earn the right.
And then how do you, because the audience is now going to be like, well, how the hell do I do that?
Yeah. So for me, this is what I do. Like, when people say, Richard, what do you do? I'm not a sales trainer, right? I simply teach reps how to earn the right to ask questions, which questions to ask, and when. And so I think you do that by reading and learning and paying attention, and, being willing to check yourself, being willing to let someone like Brandon come along and encourage you to think differently, right? I think that's where it happens. You earn the right to ask questions by simply saying it, by simply saying, hey, look, my goal of this conversation is simply this. I just want to get a frame of reference. I don't know if we're going to do business together. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. right? If we do, great. If we don't, let's walk away friends so I don't have to send you checking in, reaching out, touching base emails,
Oh,
right?
gosh.
You don't want to get them. I don't want to send them.
Yeah.
So being able to say something like that at the beginning of a conversation earns you the right to do anything else you want to do. It's one of the things I teach. It's called a respect contract, but that's what I do. I teach people how to earn the right to ask questions. And all that other stuff matters. You got to have the process and you got to have the pitch, but you got to get permission to do it. And I don't mean get permission as a child, as like, hey, mommy and daddy, can I have another cookie? I'm saying you need to get permission for each other to ask each other questions. Your time is as valuable as theirs. You know, we talk about this all the time. You have to put together a respect contract at the beginning of the conversation so that you can actually ask those questions, and that they shouldn't be annoyed that you want to ask those questions, and they should feel comfortable, you know, asking you questions back, and they should feel comfortable telling you it's not the right fit. And most importantly, you should feel comfortable telling them it's not the right fit, right? There's nothing more empowering than being able to say, God, I would love to do business with you, Brandon, but dude, I, I don't think it's the right fit. And here's why.
Wow.
And people are going to respect you more for that. And they'll come back to you a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later. Way more impressive when you do that.
Yeah. Oh man. And earning the right to ask questions. So do you think this is like doing a lot of like the research before the pitch or the appointment, like the ROI business case planning? Like, you know,
No.
what are you just saying like you have to like give and demand the same respect that your buyer is? Or I'm still trying to figure out how to put it into action. Like,
Yeah. I mean, it's simple, you know. You I'll let people in on a secret, right? Like I definitely do research on my clients. But there are times where I've done deep dive research and I've spent 20 minutes looking all over their website. There are times, you know, where I'll have a call in 5 minutes and I'm like, oh shit, I forgot.
bam, 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 bam.
And
Yeah.
and I can run through my respect contract and can easily figure out what it is they do without having done a ton of research on people.
Yeah.
Right? Imagine if you had to get on the phone and talk to somebody and the power went out. Right? You need to be that good.
Yeah. That's
Right?
awesome.
You don't have LinkedIn. You don't have their website. How would you have a sales conversation? Right? I'd started out with, hey, Brandon, look, I'm looking forward to chatting with you today. Just so you know, bud, my goal of this conversation, I just want to get a frame of reference about what you're doing over at Seamless, right? Like I just maybe ask you some questions. And of course, Brandon, I want you to ask me some questions. Is that okay? Is that fair?
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. And then I'm going to go, so listen, Brandon, you know, I'm sure you're talking to other trainers along the way. And by all means, I think you should do your due diligence. But look, if you ever feel like I'm not the right person for you, please just say so. You won't offend me. I've been doing this a long time, right? And
Yeah.
likewise, if I determine that Seamless isn't the right fit for what I do, I'm going to tell you. You know, I'm
Yeah.
gonna be like that. You're not what I want to do. You're not the kind of business I put my strength in, and so I don't want to waste your time trying to do what you want me to do if I'm not the right guy. So can we
Love that.
agree if it's not the right fit, we'll just let each other know?
It's like you call it the respect contract, right?
Yeah,
I love that, dude.
yeah,
I actually first started coming across that with Tim Wackel and Mike Brooks, Mr. Inside Sales. They didn't call it the respect contract, but like 10 years ago when I came across their content, that was like the first time I realized like, oh my God, you can ask prospects like, look, like, should I stay or should I go? Is it, you know,
yeah,
like if they hate you or you hate them, like keep the communication open so that you
yep,
know kind of where you always stand and where they always stand, that
absolutely. I mean,
uh,
and that
transparent.
I don't need to do any research to say what I just said to you,
Right.
right? I then have a transition statement that'll drive us into the conversation, right? I'll be like, so Brandon, you know, now that we've said that, what made you even want to talk to me today? And that's the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah. You
So,
and you do you recommend doing the respect contract at the beginning of the pitch or the beginning of the? It sounds like you do that kind of like you set the stage with the respect contract and then you go into the pitch.
I don't pitch. I don't. I ask a bunch of questions.
I mean
Yeah,
discovery. Sorry,
yeah.
discovery.
I go into qualification and discovery, right? So, and again, the faster I get people, you know, the faster people talk about themselves, the better off it is. And there's not one person, I promise you, there's not one person who's like, hey, Richard, yeah, let me tell you why we're here. Oh, by the way, let me give you the background. And people will be like, hey, Richard, we were started 9 years ago, and it was started by this person who did this. It's like all of it's somewhat relevant, but not really. But what's relevant is that they're now starting to talk, and the more they talk, the more willing they are to share. And that's the part I need to let happen, right? That's the part we all need to let happen, is just let people talk. It's not a big deal, right?
Awesome. I love that. Well, that's amazing. Richard Harris, how do we summarize this again? You have to
earn the right to ask questions.
Earn the right to ask questions. I was going to say the respect contract, but yeah, earn the right to ask questions, leverage the respect contract, set the stage at the beginning to make sure that you guys mutually are on, equal grounds. Your time is just as important as the prospect's time, and you got to keep that transparent, authentic line of communication to maximize sales success. Where can people follow you, subscribe to you, learn more from you?
Yeah, so the harrisconsultinggroup.com. I know it's the world's worst email address or website address, but that's what it is at the moment. The harrisconsultinggroup.com. You can get a hold of me there. LinkedIn. I do a lot of social stuff on LinkedIn. I post a lot there. So please comment. Please disagree with me. It's allowed. If you disagree with me,
I still feel like there's no way that everything you posted, I disagreed with you.
I'm probably making up a little. Come on, man. This is like, we got to entertain the audience.
Oh yeah, it's true. We had a war. We had a war. So no, Richard is all over LinkedIn all the time, commenting, posting, sharing amazing sales content. Sales Hacker.
You can also get to me at richard@saleshacker.com too.
Yeah, richard@saleshacker.com. Well, thank you so much, Richard, for joining us for this episode of Sales Secrets from the Top 1%, where the world's best sales experts share their secrets to sales success. Order your copy of the book at secretsalesbook.com. That's secretsalesbook.com. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Sales Secrets from the Top 1%. We release new episodes every Monday and Thursday, so make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube to never miss an episode.